All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Friday Fundamentals. My name is Colin Moore, and today I'll be taking you through a number of 3D-related topics in SoftPlan 2018. So some of the topics we'll be covering will be surface editing textures and going through their settings, customizing the lighting in 3D, and going through the mode options. So to start out, so we do have 9 different 3D modes to choose from in SoftPlan, so I'll get started at the top here. So starting with Wireframe, so it gives you a very simplistic view. It's showing all the edges of your surfaces in 3D. It's also really handy for positioning the camera if you wanted to put it in a specific view. And so as we go down the list, we have our visible line, so it starts to give you a sense of depth, so you're not seeing through walls at this point. And so you can also see the trees, which are just more of a billboard to give you a sense of landscape. You can now see the outlines of those. And then as we go down to shaded and sketched, it then adds some color to your 3D renderings. And so from shaded here, so there is an effect to make it appear sketched depending on the effect you're looking for. And now in the illustrated, it'll give you more of a stipple effect. And one way to sharpen it a little bit if it's not exactly to your liking is the anti-alias. So you can see if I turn this off, it's more of adding a crispness to your 3D views. And so I just have it here set at 2, but that can be increased if you'd like. And so you can see it does affect how that how this pen and ink effect displays in 3D. Okay, so from Illustrated, we can go down to Clay Model. So this is more of a monochrome mode, so all these surfaces are going to be the color that you've chosen. In this case, it's more of a clay or a beige color, as you see here. And then through watercolor, so as the title may express, so it is more of a watercolor effect you'll see here. And so the way to hone these effects or to customize them is going into the mode options, and then there should be an effects tab there that you can find. So here under watercolor, so in this mode, this effect is turned on, and so there is a brush size that you can increase. And then there's also this wobble checkbox here, and so you can see how it affects your 3D views. And we'll go into the mode options in much more detail once we go through these last couple modes. So textured is probably where you're going to spend a lot of your time. So it gives you really good quality. As you can see, we now have textures here, nice shadows, but it doesn't take terribly long to generate. But when you have your finished product and you're ready to export images or start printing your plan sets, that's when you could start to use ray traced in 3D. And so near the end of this session, I'll be generating a ray traced view here for you with a bunch of the other lighting settings just to give you an idea. But in some cases, it might take a few moments, maybe even a few minutes to generate that view. Okay, so from these modes, we're going to jump right into the mode options. So these will be separate for each mode in 3D, but those can be accessed up here in the Options tab, and we can go down to Mode Options. So the first tab you're brought to is the renderer. So the first 8 modes here, so everything from wireframe to textured, will use the hardware. So it's just the way that that 3D view is analyzed. And then ray traced will use software. So it's, and you'll see at the end, there will be these yellow squares radiating out from the center of the 3D view image. So it just ray traced will have more accurate and advanced shadow and lighting calculations. So you'll get a more realistic final product. It just takes a little longer to generate, obviously. So also in this renderer tab is our anti-alias, and so that, as I kind of mentioned before, will increase the sharpness of that 3D view. So initially you may notice the lines, they aren't, so on an angle you may notice they're a little choppy, but as the anti-alias takes effect, and you can see it go across the 3D view, these lines are much smoother, and so it's a much nicer quality of your view here. And so the tab over off to the right is our line options. And so initially this is disabled, but so this will allow you to see the edges of the surfaces in 3D. Now to make it generate a little faster, I'm going to turn off the anti-alias for now. And so you can see the edges of the surfaces will be visible now based on the color of those surfaces. So you can see for these posts or the door here and the columns, you can see those edges are white. Now if you wanted to use a single color for these edges of the surfaces, that's where this checkbox kind of comes into play. So now you can see each of these lines is now black regardless of the surface it refers to. And also, if you notice these lines are a bit too choppy or a bit thick, you can turn on this anti-alias here, so it'll be a very useful tool for you. And as you can see, it sharpens up that image quite nicely. So it's, as you're working, it's kind of trying to find a balance of quality, but trying to have it generate fairly quickly so you're not waiting a lot. But these options are here for when you're ready to generate a realistic image. Right, and so from the line options, you can also have the texture lines appear. So if you wanted to see more detail with the textures itself, you can enable that option. And so from the line options tab, we can go over to the setup options. I want to go over a few options here, and then we'll finish off in the mode options. So here, also in the options tab, we can go to setup options, and there's this auto horizon checkbox. And so as you can see here, we're using a site plan. So our property is currently being used. Now the auto horizon is a simplistic representation of grade, and so it will just be a single plane of grass that extends into infinity. But as you can see, our property has a distinct boundary, and we also have a rounded edge over here. But if we were going to go into the setup options and turn on the auto horizon, so now you can see it's the auto horizon is just a nice way of showing grade, but one fallback of the auto horizon is you can't model it or you can't manipulate it other than its vertical position. So if you wanted to expose some of the foundation, or you just needed to just adjust its vertical position, you could adjust it. Say if I wanted to put it a few feet down from what it was currently. There we go. But at the moment, our property and auto horizon are on at the same time, so you can see they're both visible here. I'm going to turn this off for now, but just so that you're aware where that is available. And there's also this bar here, so display quality while moving the camera. So currently have this at about 2, so that just means that while you're orbiting around in your 3D view, it lowers the quality so you can move a lot more smoothly. But if I was going to put this to 3, so you'll get the quality, but it's a little more choppy. And so this may vary depending on what kind of a computer you have and the video card as well, but I'm just going to keep it at 2 for now, so you can see the 3D view does change while I'm orbiting, so it just reduces the quality a bit. And so that's where that setting is if you did want to change that. So again, that's up in the setup options near the bottom. And finally, there's the highlight target surfaces in your setup options. So this is if you were going to edit a window or a wall, and just so that you know exactly what you're editing when you move your cursor over that surface in 3D. So I'm going to turn this on and show you what I mean. And I'm just going to zoom in. So when we go to the Look at Surface command, I can go to click a surface that I want to bring the camera in on. I'm going to choose this front brick wall. So that takes the camera in, and we're now looking flat on that brick wall. And so if I was going to use the edit command, and I bring my cursor over these surfaces, so you can see they're now highlighted in yellow. Just so that you know that I'm going to be editing this wall or this symbol or that opening. Now you may have seen in the mode options, when we go back to the line options, the highlight color is currently yellow. So if you didn't necessarily like that color, that's fully customizable for you to change if you preferred the highlight color to be gray or blue or anything you'd like. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off for now, just so that you're aware. And we'll continue on to the lighting. Okay, so I do have custom lighting enabled here, and so the first option you'll see is the ambient light. So this will give you control over the overall lighting or the overall brightness in your 3D view. Right now it's kind of set at 6, but so you can see as I start to increase this, the brightness all around your 3D view starts to increase without adding any other light sources. It's just whatever you're more comfortable at working with. So I can bring that back down to 6, just so that you'll eventually see the effect of other light sources and electrical symbols. The ambient occlusion is a nice effect, so giving you more ambient light. It also softens some of the light a little bit, so again, for more realistic rendering, that's what this option here is for. The headlight, I would think of it as a point light sitting above the camera. So it highlights or brightens any surfaces that your camera is looking at or that you're currently looking at this point. So it's pretty low at this point, again, just so that you can see the other lights that are in play. And then there's also indirect lighting. So if there were, say for instance, in the kitchen, so I'm going to go over to this view here. There's a lot of light bouncing off other surfaces, and that's what the indirect lighting can take advantage of. So if the light was coming from the ceiling and bounced off of the floor, for instance, depending on its reflectivity, it may go off the cabinet and then into the backsplash. And so these settings are available as well. And then these shadows here, and the option to turn off the lights in symbols. So if that's turned on, any light sources from the electrical symbols are now turned off. So that's just a way of turning off the lights depending on what you want it to see. And so the next tab we'll look at is the background. So right now I have a custom background chosen here, but they're just images that we have available for you to take a look at. And so that will change how the sky looks in the background. And so this is, so again, in the background tab, if you wanted to use your own images, you can definitely save them in here. So just to show you where they are, it will be in the C drive and then in the SoftPlan folder. Just give me a second here. And then it'll be under 3D and then backgrounds. And so they're just images themselves, the same as the textures. So you could bring in, if you had a brick texture that you wanted to use rather than one that we currently have available. So they, as you can see here, so we have the C drive, our SoftPlan folder, and 3D textures and backgrounds. Now in the case of a custom brick texture that you wanted to take advantage of, that will be under bitmaps. And so these are all of the textures that we have available at the moment. So if we went into exterior finish and then brick, for example, these are the textures that we currently have. And so they're just small samples of materials that will repeat across the surface that you've applied them to. And so if you did have an image, I guess you could put it in here to kind of test it out, but it may require a bit of cropping to make sure it repeats nicely across the applied surface. Okay, and then there's also an option to position it based on the image that you've chosen in the background. So next will be the Effects tab. And so what we're seeing here, so there's only a few settings in here. One will be the fog level, so I'll bring it to the exterior view. And so this, as the title suggests, is the amount of fog that you'll see. So under Effects, we currently have 0. Well, let's say bring it up to 20. There we go, so you can see the effect of fog is taking place. Under the line option, I'm going to turn that off for now. There you go. And so there are quite a few settings that you can kind of play with to start out with, but just so that you're aware of what they do and where you can find them, that's what we're here for. And so there's also this pen and ink checkbox, and so this was the stipple effect that we have automatically turned on in illustrated mode. And so again, they're kind of thick dots at the moment, but that can be refined if we go back to the renderer tab and turn on our anti-alias. And so you can see that start to generate as we go down. And so really you can make any mode appear like another. It's just that the defaults for those modes are set up here in the mode options. So under the effects again, you could make textured mode appear like illustrated mode. It just depends on which settings you want to combine together. And then finally, as we went through before, there's the watercolor feature, so you could apply this effect to textured mode if you'd like. Excellent. And so that should do it for the mode options. There's just one more tab to go actually. So in the face options, these are a bunch of the master switches, I like to call them. So we have our reflections, our relief depth, and the emission. So if any textures had a certain amount of reflectivity in them, so for instance the glazing or stainless steel appliances, this is the master switch to make that reflectivity visible. So I'm going to go back to the kitchen where we were before, regenerate that here. And so we can turn on that reflectivity so that you can see, so some of these surfaces, I'm going to surface edit this range here. Right now we have a fairly low reflectivity just because it is a stainless steel appliance, but we don't want it to be as reflective as a mirror or glazing in a window. So it's kind of low, but I'm going to show you what that does. Okay, so the master switch again will be up in the mode options and under face options. So at the moment it's turned off, and so this will help your 3D views generate faster. That's why I just had it turned off initially. So it's just a matter of preserving your system resources. We don't want it to be working too hard to continually generate your reflections. That's why I came up with that prompt for you to manually regenerate the image. So it may just take a second here, but you see now the fridge and any surfaces that had any kind of reflectivity are now showing that value. So you can see here in the fridge, there, so it does have a slight reflectivity there. So now you can see how it's reflecting surfaces as well as the countertop here. So it's pretty nice. So as we go through the other selections here, so the depth relief, I like to use brick in this example, so it's creating the illusion of depth in that texture that you're looking at. I'm going to turn this off for now and go back to exterior, and we're going to take a closer look at this brick. Okay, so we're going to turn on that depth relief. Actually, should already be turned on. So just to kind of show you what it does, I'm going to zoom in a bit more, and I'm going to bring it right down to 0. So right now it's at roughly 60, and we'll go through these settings as well. And so if I bring it back to 0, it's going to look a lot more flat than it did initially. There we go, rather than if we brought it up to 80, for instance. There we go. So it kind of gives it some pop, some illusion of depth, I suppose, in this flat surface. So that can be quite nice as well. And then finally we have the emission. So this more pertains to electrical symbols and the light sources themselves. So it just makes a surface appear like it's emitting light. And so for this example, I'm going to go back to the kitchen, just kind of flipping back and forth. And we're going to look at the fluorescent light fixture up here at the top. So emission is currently turned on. Just wanted to check that here. So if we go to surface edit the glass portion of this fluorescent light, you can see the emissive is currently set at 90, but if we bring this, crank it way up just so you can see. There we go. So it just appears to be a bit brighter, although it's not actually emitting any more light than it was initially. And so as we continue to brighten that up, there, so it continually gets brighter. And you can do that for any surface, but in most cases we just have it by default turned on for the glass portions of electrical symbols. And so that will do it for the mode options, because yeah, those were the three main settings I wanted to go through with you. Now also for the monochrome, so for the clay model, now we typically have it set to a beige or a clay color. But if you did want to change that color, that can be selected up here. So in that Face Options tab. And so now we'll go through the texture settings. And back to the outside, and we'll look at the brick still. So when you first surface edit a texture, it'll typically bring you to the Texture Color tab. And so this shows you the image that's currently being used. And so right now it's 6 courses of brick, and that's the texture that's repeating across this surface. Now, if you did want to change the color but keep the texture, that's where you can change this. So you could change this to any color you'd like if you wanted it to be more of an orange, for example. Now, initially, you would just be given a flat surface, but the only reason you can see that depth of the brick is due to the relief depth here. So if we brought this down to 0, you're just looking at a solid wall. Just a solid, flat wall here. So just so that you know that you could apply a custom color to a texture, that's how you could do it. So enable display color, choose the color that you want to use, and then finally it's increasing the relief depth. Typically between 60 and 100 might be the value you might like, so that it's not too obtrusive, but it's nice to see. There we go. And now I'm just going to bring that back to use our default texture here. And so what you're given is a choice of all of the textures that we have available, and kind of like I'd shown you before, you can add your own if you have one available or if you found a manufacturer you really like. And so any library that you wanted to choose from, you can definitely change that. And so over in the Options tab is more of the settings related to that texture. So at the beginning, we have our horizontal and vertical size, and so that's the size of the image that's repeating. And so you can see here we have 6 courses of brick. If we did the math here, so the standard height for brick typically is about 2.6 inches. So the entire height of this would be 16 inches, or 1'4". And then also for the default or standard length, we have roughly 8 inches. And so times that by 2, we again have our 1'4". So that's where these sizes come from, just so that we have a texture that accurately represents what's going to be there in the finished product. If you did want to change this, you can choose whether or not to maintain the aspect ratio. And if that is the case, you could, for instance, set the horizontal distance to 2, and maintaining the aspect ratio, it will also change the vertical value as well. And because the texture is square, they're going to be the same value. Now, in the case that you don't want that, you could set this back to 1'4", and with this disabled, the horizontal value will remain different. And so that you can see how that works. So now you can see the brick is longer, but it's still the same height. So I'll set them back to 1'4", and so starting down these values here, similar to what you saw in the lighting, the ambient value is just the overall brightness of that brick texture. So if we were to bring this up here, if the texture itself was kind of dark, or you just didn't have a lot of lighting, you can absolutely edit individual surfaces and make them a bit brighter. And now the diffuse and specular is just how much light it appears to take or emit from that surface. The opacity is, well, really how opaque it is. So right now it's set to 100, so it's completely solid. If you wanted to partially see through this material or this surface, we could reduce the opacity. And so it's just generating here. So now you can see into, well, the next material in that wall type that we're currently looking at. And so that's what we've done with the glazing on these openings. We've reduced the opacity typically down to 30 or 40, but it's really up to you to completely customize if you wanted something a little different. And then we've already been playing with the relief depth a bit. So again, it's that illusion of depth and the reflectivity here. The brick itself here, you may not want it to be reflective at all, so we can keep that unchecked. And then finally the emissive, so whether it's going to appear like it's emitting light, that's what this value here is for. And then there's a few options at the very bottom. The texture map type, typically you may want it set to orthographic, so telling the surface or telling the texture that it's going to be placed on a flat surface rather than on a box, a cylinder, or a sphere. So it, depending on what kind of an object is the texture is being applied to, is the texture map type that you'll choose. The audio orient, I'll go through these checkboxes. This will reorient the symbol along the longest edge of the applied surface. And so if this was enabled and it was a long post, then the brick would be rotated 90 degrees because that post would typically be longer than it is wide. It won't change in this case because this length of wall is actually longer than it is tall. Invert would, like it says, just kind of rotates at 180 degrees. Rotate would give you a 90-degree rotate. So then instead of being oriented horizontally, it'll be vertically. It's just going to take a second here to update. And so as we go down the list, scale will take the original textured image and stretch it across the longest length of the applied surface. So if it was a 10-foot long wall, you would see these two courses of brick extend along that length of wall. So it would become quite large in some cases. But again, it depends on the texture you're using and the surface that you were applying it to. So I'm going to turn on scale in this case and then just wait for this to regenerate. So you'll see that brick texture is now the entire size of this brick wall here, and it also does that, applies that change to any other instance where the brick A material is used. And so the coin material is slightly different. That's why it's not affected, but the walls themselves are. So you can see the name of that surface is different. So we did differentiate it from the brick A material itself. But just in case you were wondering why the coin wasn't updating, but the walls themselves were. So we're going to turn this off, and then smoothing, like it says, it will smooth the texture. Transparent is more of a feature you may want to use for the billboard trees, or if you were applying a fireplace texture to a solid plane. It will, in the top left corner of that surface, it will make that color transparent. And so we have a fireplace texture that we typically use. I'm going to find it here for you. So if you applied this to a solid plane, so if you were creating a fireplace, you put a plane of, a solid plane in that fireplace and applied this texture to it, the transparent checkbox will find the color that's in the top left corner, make it transparent so that you're seeing this fireplace kind of floating in midair so that you don't see any of this black color. It makes it more realistic, but you may not use it very much, but I just wanted to make sure you knew what that transparent checkbox did. And so you can see it repeating across. And so if we turned on scale as well, that would make it such that you only see one fireplace for each length of wall. There we go. So there's one fireplace that's quite large, but just so that you get my meaning. So we're going to cancel this to go back to brick. Okay, perfect. And then we also want to turn off scale. All right, just so we're back to what we were before. So you may notice a bunch of these named 3D views. And so these are view files that I've saved over the last few days, but so that you know how to do that. So it's a way of easily going from one area of your floor plans or your house itself to another. So you can see I have a view file I saved from the master bedroom. I have one from bedroom 2. And you can see we have one from the kitchen and just the outside itself. Okay, so how to save one. All right, so let's go to the back porch because we'll need to go back there eventually. Okay, so if we have the camera in the exact spot we want, We can then go up to the File button. I'm going to turn off the line options for a second. Okay, perfect. Already turned off. But you want to go to File, View File, and then Save. And so that takes the current camera position and saves it here. So we're going to call it Back Porch. All right, so you can see the name of that 3D view is now changed to Back Porch, and we have our saved 3D view here in the navigation bar that you can easily access when you need to. Okay, so now that we're here, actually, I can go through drawing a profile in 3D because it's pretty handy, but it may take a little bit to get used to the feature. So this I've actually drawn in manually so that the freeze board would display the way I wanted to, only part way along this wall rather than the full length. So I'm just going to erase this for now and show you how I did it. Okay, so what we start with is going to the Draw tab and clicking on Profile. The one I chose here is just a simple square profile, so that's what we're going to end up being, and it just extrudes this profile along the given length and surface that you've chosen. So to start with, we want to click on the surface what we're going to apply it to, so select Host Plane. We're going to click on this siding material, and then we're going to start the profile. Now, to be exact, I'm going to turn on our cursor snap. You can do that by pressing F11, or there's actually an icon here for the cursor snap. I'm going to select it here. So now we're going to choose the start point. And so you can see this red line's extending out from the cursor. We want to choose where it ends. There we go, and a third click to choose the orientation. And now it does prompt us to start a second segment, but one segment is all we need. So I'm going to right-click to end the command. It's going to take a second here to load. There we go. All right, so we have the profile drawn. Now the last thing we'll have to do is adjust the size because the freeze board is a little smaller than the square profile that we've drawn. And now we can always add our own custom profiles when you'd like, just using lines and shapes and going into the system library to use that one-step command. But we can also edit the profile in 3D and change its size. So what we're looking for is a 5.5-inch height and a 0.75-inch thickness. There we go. So you can now see it matches the freeze board around that corner. So it looks pretty nice, pretty seamless. But that was the profile command, and so that's only available in 3D, but the snap feature really makes it nice to use and very precise. An alternative to that is using the banding command. So if we go to that same spot, you can see it's already being used here, but it's this classic brick profile that you may have noticed along the brick on the wainscot wall. But the banding command can be found in the Draw tab in 2D or 3D. So using the Draw banding, choose the profile and the material you want applied to it, and then you can start tracing along the wall that you'd like. But that's another option, rather than having to use that profile command in 3D. I'll also go through the mouse controls and the 3D view controls, because they can be really handy as well. Okay, so probably the control I use the most is the right mouse button. So this allows you to pan from side to side when you click and hold it. So again, this is the right mouse button using the pan. If you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, clicking the scroll wheel down, let's focus on this post actually. So if we click it, that centers the camera and the focus point on that column. So if I was to hold the scroll wheel down now, we're orbiting around that focused surface. Just so that you're aware how to orbit around. So I click the scroll wheel on the center of this wall. Now I click and hold the scroll wheel again, and now we're orbiting around the center of this siding and brick wall. Right? And we can also hold the right mouse button down and the scroll wheel as well, and now we're pivoting the camera on its current location. And so as for these controls down here, The 3D camera controls are pretty self-explanatory. You can see these arrows will move the camera up and down, side to side, in and out. And so the camera will, if it finds property, a floor system, or a stair, it will eventually try to bring it down to eye level, which is roughly 5.5 feet, I believe. But to continue, if you were going to zoom in a certain area and you wanted to keep the camera at its current trajectory, I'm scrolling in with the right mouse button pressed. And you can also increase the scroll and zoom speed by holding the Alt key. So that brings you much quicker to the surface that you're going to. I will also show you the go to room command. So when we go to camera, there's this go to room command here. So I have a bunch of rooms I've added to this project, and so if we wanted to go to that area quickly without having to manually navigate there, let's say we go to the laundry room, and so it also tells you the drawing where that room was added to. So we can go to the laundry room, press OK, so that brings you directly there without any extra work needed. And so to show you where rooms can be added, we'll go back to plan. So right now we're just here in drawing mode, but if we went down to room mode here, so there's a number of rooms that have already been added. As you can see, I left one blank so I can show you the process. But it's just a way of easily adding interior finishes to that area. So the individual finishes can be found in interior mode. And so you'll see all these polygons, so that includes things like, well, actually you can see them here. So wall covering, baseboard, crown molding. So you can see all these can be added individually to areas, but room mode you may find a bit more of an expedited feature. So in this case, we're going to add the bedroom number 2 polygon to this area. And I also have an exterior view showing you it's kind of, well, unfinished at the moment. So you can see the bare drywall as well as the subfloor down here. So as soon as we go to draw a room, we're given a choice of all of the presets available thus far. You can create your own rooms or customize existing ones, but right now I'm just going to use the default bedroom 2. And whether or not you want to manually or auto trace it. So if it was an open concept area, you can manually trace it. But if it's an enclosed area, we can use the auto trace, click inside the room. And so there is a pitch ceiling. So what I'm going to do is choose not to add the ceiling because that was a part of the room definition. So I'll continue, choose not to add that flat ceiling, and everything else is now added. So just to verify, we can go back to interior mode. And so you can see this blue here is the carpet that was added, and the yellow would be our wall covering. And you can edit these interior finishes either from room mode or you can do it from interior mode. Just in case a wall covering had to move to a different wall, you can use that adjust item command to have it reference this one, for instance. So back in 3D, looking at this bedroom 2, it should now have all of the finishes that were specified for the bedroom 2 room polygon. So you can see it has a nice color on the walls and carpet here on the floor. And there's even baseboard here. And so just briefly going into the room definition, we could go into the room properties dialog, and so the room we last added is now highlighted. And so you can change how the label displays in plan. So if there wasn't enough room, for instance, you could just put BR2. Or in the case of bathroom, you could just include bath, as you can see that here. Or even not have a label show up at all. So you could choose to disable that if you'd like. Whether or not you want the size of the room, the color. So in case you didn't like the pink, you could change it to something else. And there's even an electrical symbol that could be added automatically. And for this one, so you can see double clicking on it gives you access to all of our electrical symbols. So there's a lot of stuff that you could add, but rooms might make things a little easier for you. So it adds, you can see wall covering here automatically. Go over to baseboard. You can see we're looking at the same room, but you can actually make a change to anyone that is currently in this project. So by default, we didn't include chair rail. As you can see, you go through all these tabs to configure it. Okay, and now finally, I can just touch on the layers and building options. So in this floor plan, I don't have terribly many layers, but one of them, kind of an important one, is the furniture. So I currently have that turned off. So it's just a way of simplifying your floor plan in 2D. So layers give you the ability to hide items in plan, but they'll still show up in 3D. So you can see all the furniture that you may have seen in 3D is now visible here in plan. Now the difference between layers and building options is layers will affect the item's 2D visibilities, whereas building options will affect the 2D and 3D visibilities. So in the case where you have multiple kitchen layouts, for example, you can easily switch between kitchen layout 1, kitchen layout 2, and 3, and that will turn on and off the related layouts both in plan and in 3D. So that can be pretty handy as well. Now the reason for the color of all of the furniture is a setting here in the layer setup. So just so that you're aware, going up to options and layer setup is where you can go. And for the furniture layer, we've turned off use items color. And so you see if I turn that back on, it reverts the symbols back to their default as specified color. But if that's turned off, it will default to whichever color you've chosen here. So if you prefer it to have a dark green instead, we pick that color. You can see the color of everything on that layer is now changed to a dark green. Now as for building options, those can be accessed from the Model tab, and clicking on Building Options, because the building options do affect 3D, it's affecting what you see in the model. That's why it's a different location. So you'll see it's a very similar setup to layers. You can group building options as well, but I didn't have terribly much set up here. But as you can see, for the most part, on the default building option, that's where these items are. Excellent. Well, that does it for today's Friday Fundamentals session. Thank you all very much for joining me today. I hope you learned a lot. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to contact us here at support. We'd be glad to help you out. Our email address is support, so SUPPORT, at softplantech.com. And just as a reminder, we do post these videos on our website as well as our YouTube channel, in case you wanted to rewatch certain parts or you can't make it to one of the sessions. Thanks again, everyone. Bye for now.